It seems like a lot of people are feeling stuck in the middle these days, or at least caught in the middle when it comes to their finances. Longer lifespans and other factors have created a massive sandwich generation, and many Americans over the age of 50 are part of it. The question becomes, will caring for aging parents and grown children put the squeeze on your retirement plans? Yes, it's time once again to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
With us, David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
But David Scranton says, hey, not so fast.
How does it affect the markets? How does it affect the economy? Thanks to efficiencies and new technology and a staff of veteran analysts and portfolio managers, Sound Income Strategies strives to set new standards and bring institutional style investing to your portfolio. It's no secret that modern life has, yes, created an enormous sandwich generation, and that many baby boomers are part of it. They're feeling the squeeze of helping elderly parents with health care and other expenses, while also providing financial support for their grown children. In some worst-case scenarios, Americans in their 50s and 60s are bankrupting their own retirement accounts. Why? To help out parents and children, with no backup plan to ensure their own financial security 10 to 20 years down the road. It's a tough situation, both financially and emotionally. But if you're in this situation, there are actions that you can take to address and to improve it. And we're going to talk about those on today's show. Helping us will be our guest, Hodder, author of the Amazon bestseller, Estate Planning for the Sandwich Generation. My good friend and author, Dee Carter, and CEO of Blue Ocean Wealth, Marguerita Cheng. But first, let's talk about what the sandwich generation is for people over the age of 50 and what makes it so incredibly challenging. According to a Pew Research Center study, about 1 out of every 8 Americans or so between the ages of 40 and 60 care directly for an aging parent, while another 7 to 10 million help their parents or other aging relatives, even from a distance. Meanwhile, many of the same people between 40 and 60 have grown or nearly grown children who also need some level of financial help. Now, obviously, these are members of the sandwich generation. And this term, sandwich generation, was first coined by social worker Dorothy Miller in 1981. And since then, the number of adults caught in this generational squeeze has grown exponentially. And it's expected to keep growing as more and more baby boomers become senior citizens themselves, thus leaving their children, yes, stuck in the middle. There are several reasons for rapid growth of the sandwich generation in recent years. Some of them are obvious and others are less obvious. Improvements in medicine and healthcare, for example, ensure that people are living longer these days. That means people whose own children are grown are more likely to also have a parent still living and possibly in need of frequent or ongoing medical care. In some situations, these individuals end up acting directly as caregivers for their aging parents, simply because paying for nurses or other professionals to support them simply isn't reality for them. But often in these cases, the financial savings are replaced by a tremendous amount of psychological, emotional, and logistical stress. As the number of people in this situation has increased throughout the years, some communities have established nonprofit programs to help out. But often these programs are overburdened and have long waiting lists. And as if all this weren't stressful enough, changes in social and economic factors in the last decade have increased the likelihood that many adults caring for aging parents are financially assisting their grown children as well. Now, while the job market has been improving recently and in the 10 years since the financial crisis, it's still true that many young adults in their 20s or so have struggled to find gainful employment, including many with a college degree. Many have returned to the empty nest, so the nest isn't empty any longer, and their parents have ended up having them to support to some extent, even if only for basic living expenses like food, laundry, and shelter. But as many parents today are well aware, that can add up, especially when coupled with the expense of an aging parent on the other end of it. If you're caught in this sandwich generation, you should be aware that its challenges are only likely to increase as you yourself grow older. As your own healthcare costs increase, you face the prospect of decreasing income after retirement. You also face the possibility of having limited options for generating new income in case that you've depleted a lot of your savings, or let's say if you've neglected, for example, what I like to call financial defense within your own retirement investment strategies. Now, that all I know sounds pretty grim, and in some situations it is. Fortunately, as the problems faced by members of the sandwich generation have received increasing publicity in recent years, strategies to help deal with the problems have also become the focus of new research. This includes strategies aimed at addressing the psychological and emotional burdens of the sandwich generation, as well as the financial burdens. And because those issues are often intertwined, some strategies aimed at addressing both have been created. We're going to share some of those strategies along with some of our own tips for helping ensure that these burdens of the sandwich generation don't undermine and possibly even derail your own retirement goals. We'll start by discussing ways to keep your adult children from jeopardizing your retirement savings. As we've noted on another recent show, this process can be difficult. Why? Because many people have a psychological roadblock that prevents them from dealing with this topic. Later, we'll look specifically at some strategies for helping your aging parents without harming your own financial future. One sure way to simplify some of these strategies and improve your odds of meeting all the challenges of the sandwich generation is to have an estate plan in place. With that in mind, let's welcome our first guest, Catherine Hodder. Catherine Hodder is a former estate planning attorney who now focuses on writing helpful articles for members of the sandwich generation. Her book, Estate Planning for the Sandwich Generation, is an Amazon #1 bestseller, and she speaks frequently to groups and organizations about the importance of estate planning in protecting yourself and your family. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, David.
I have to tell you, I'm a little jealous of you. I am. You know, my own book only made it to #2 on the Amazon list. And, you know, I'm going to have to give our producer some business about this. I told him that we can't have any guests who ranked higher than me on the Amazon list. But I guess this time, because it's you, we'll let it slip through. Is that fair?
Well, I appreciate that.
So tell us your personal story about what motivated you to write this book.
Well, the reason why I actually wrote this is because I am an estate planning attorney. I am in the sandwich generation, and I really want people to understand how estate planning can help them. My father, many years ago, had very specific wishes about his end of life, meaning don't hook me up to machines, that type of thing. I told him at the time, you know, you need to put this in writing because I'm not going to be arguing with Mom about your wishes. And at that time, he did get all his estate planning documents together.
Good.
And then he began what became a 10-year battle with Alzheimer's. And through that, I learned firsthand how helpful estate planning documents can be, such as who has power of attorney for finances. If he's hospitalized for an extended period of time, who is going to take care of the finances? If he's hospitalized as well, who can get information and make medical decisions when he can't? And also at the time, I was in finance. But going through that experience and then going into the practice of law, I decided I really wanted to help other people understand what I lived, and the fact that you are going to deal with future life events as we age, and estate planning can really help those hassles or make things less hassle.
And I bet it's made you a much better attorney, the fact that you lived this personally. You know, it's not just now you're doing estate end of life planning for somebody because, you know, you read it in the textbook and you were smart enough to pass the bar. You know, you had to go through it yourself. That has to help in a lot of ways, I can imagine.
Well, and you do. You experience things that you say, oh, I assume this durable power of attorney will, you know, that you get online will work anywhere. But then the bank that takes it and says, well, now we need our legal department to look at it. And then you step back and realize, like, well, actually, a durable power of attorney needs specific language that a bank will be comfortable with, meaning if they follow the instructions, they're not going to be sued. So, there's a lot of things that you may, I guess, assume would happen if you did certain things. And you've come to find out that, especially with stringent HIPAA laws, trying to get information of next of kin is not as easy as you would think it would be. And it's especially a problem if you don't live in the same town as your parents and, are calling in. It's tough to get information and to prove to the doctors that they can talk to you.
Now, we've got about 45 seconds left to the commercial break. And in that time, give us like 2 of your top pieces of advice for helping with parents who might be becoming ill, that top part of the sandwich. Because then when you come back after the break, I want to talk to you about the children.
Great. Well, for the parents, I would think number one first is communication, finding out what plans they have, what estate planning documents they may have or may need to get, especially with regards to health care decisions and with regard to finances.
Okay. Number one.
The second piece is really, and this is, I found extremely important for most families, to have one place where you have financial, legal, and medical information. We would give it to our clients and calling it a 911 binder, meaning when you got a call from a hospital, you knew exactly where your healthcare power of attorney is on your parents, so you can then go talk to the doctor. If you needed to pay bills or taxes, you had the financial power of attorney that you could go to the bank. You had a list of their medications. You knew where their safety deposit box was. All
in one spot. That's great. That is great advice. We need to take a commercial break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Catherine Hodder. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. We'll see you all next Sunday. This is fun. This is great. 3, 2, 1. I'd like to take a few seconds and tell you why I decided to write the book entitled Return on Principle. Basically, it all boils down to this. Let's face it, you deserve to live a happy retirement. It's as simple as that. But for many, the subject of money, finance, and math is complicated. Here's a fun fact. Many Americans claim that they'd much rather clean a toilet than calculate a tip in a restaurant. Thank you, I guess. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. Using the 7 core values I outline in my book, you too will be able to build a life based upon the right core principles. Cut. Return on Principle isn't just a book about financial investing, it's about investing in your life. I know for a fact that you're going to love it. Okay, now it's just getting a little weird here. A recent Pew Research Center survey found that 61% of parents in the great United States of America admitted to helping their adult children financially. While no parent wants to see his or her child go, the hard truth is that when parents put their child's financial needs ahead of their own, it can be an absolute recipe for disaster for all involved. You're probably familiar with the recent story about Christina and Mark Rotondo, the New York couple who sued their own 30-year-old son in order to get him to move out of the house. And naturally, no family wants to end up in a situation like this. And there's really no need to. In fact, there are a number of steps that you can take for the benefit of everyone involved, especially when dealing with this particular side of this generational sandwich, such as these strategies shared recently by Forbes. Number 1, have a clear understanding of your own financial needs and retirement goals. If that sounds familiar, it may be because you're a regular viewer and you've heard me discuss the importance of identifying your specific retirement goals many, many times. In this situation, do it with an understanding that this process will ultimately lead to a frank conversation with your son or daughter about what kind of help you can and cannot offer based primarily upon your own budgetary restraints and personal goals that you and your spouse have identified. Next, Be honest, be brutally honest in identifying your needs and goals and communicating with your children. Consider important questions such as, have you saved enough for any unexpected healthcare expenses? Keep in mind that the cost of healthcare rises at a faster and steeper inflation rate than the overall rate of inflation. Or, are your savings on track to support the lifestyle that you envision for your own retirement? Understand that as a general rule, you need to replace at least 70% of your pre-retirement income in order to maintain a similar lifestyle after you stop working. Another important reason for being brutally honest is this. By showing your children that you have a clear understanding of your own financial goals and that you're committed to accomplishing them, sets a great example for them that they can follow. So be very specific about the kind of help you can provide and can't provide and for how long. Lead by example. It's in your own best interest and your children's, and it will help prevent problems and hurt feelings down the road. Number 3, consider bringing a professional into the mix. Working with a professional financial advisor, ideally one who specializes in retirement income planning, can bring some much needed objectivity into the mix and help diffuse any emotionally charged elements of the situation. Having a professional go over the budget with you can help your children understand that the issue has nothing to do with your personal relationship with them. It's simply a matter of dollars and cents. It also sets another good example by showing how working with the right advisor can improve their odds of financial success also down the road. And finally, put everything in writing and review your progress regularly. This will help to ensure that both sides have the same expectations. And reviewing the agreement frequently will allow you to see whether it remains reasonable or it needs to be adjusted over time. For example, maybe your child has received a raise at work, or you've incurred unexpected medical expenses. Whatever the case, your son or daughter should know that if these circumstances change, you would expect them to be flexible and to understand that your commitment to supporting them might have to change accordingly. Without a doubt, financial conversations with family can be difficult. But when it comes to addressing this particular challenge of the sandwich generation, you can make the conversation less difficult and more successful by following these 4 strategies. Identify your own financial goals and needs. Be honest with yourself and your children. Work with a professional when appropriate, and yes, put everything in writing and review it on a regular basis. And now it's time to welcome back Catherine Hodder, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Estate Planning for the Sandwich Generation. So Catherine, you gave us some good advice for the top end of the sandwich, the parents, and about communicating with them on the estate planning side, making sure the documents are squared away, and then also having everything in one place. Very important, because you never know when something's going to happen. But now let's talk about the other part of it that is even a little more emotionally sensitive, perhaps. And it's those adult children who perhaps aren't quite financially self-sufficient yet.
Right. And, self-sufficient or not, estate planning is something you should really look at where your children are. So, for example, with grown children, they may have left your nest, but if they're in another state and get injured or hospitalized, how are you going to get information on them or be able to make medical decisions for them? It's a good idea to have a healthcare power of attorney for them. And also if you have minor children, you should be able to name guardians for them so that should something happen to you, you have made the decision of who would take care of your children, not leave it up to a court that doesn't know you, doesn't know your children, and doesn't know your family dynamics.
So what's the best way then, let's say that I've got a child that's in my house and tried to find a job, couldn't quite pull it off, needs some financial help. Maybe there's just some reason why they're never going to have really extremely high earnings potential. And I want to make provisions for that person. And I know it's different for everybody in terms of how they structure their estate plan, but what are a couple simple things that people should be considering at least in a scenario like that?
Well, if you have real concerns about a child being able to manage money, especially if you're talking about inheritance, like you don't want a child who really can't manage money to come into a whole bunch of it. So there's things you could do within wills, such as create a spendthrift trust. And you could also set up a living trust, or called a revocable trust, where they're the beneficiary, but they really can't pull out the money themselves. You would make the money available for things like maintenance, support, healthcare, education. But if they wanted to get a car, the trustee that you would name, who would handle the money, would be saying, let's look at a Honda rather than a Ferrari.
And just so people know, the primary reason for a trust really is, if you're in law school studying this stuff, as you were, the primary reason is to be able to manage your money from the grave. So isn't it true that with a good estate planning attorney, you can get really creative? For example, you can say, okay, I want to motivate my child. So every dollar that they earn in a given year, they could match that dollar with an equal withdrawal from the trust. Almost like matching on a 401k. So you can get fairly creative with trusts. Isn't that one of the big benefits?
Yeah, you absolutely could. But one thing I would like to caution viewers is that we like to say, even though you can rule from the grave, think about what those rules are. So, for example, it may be very important for your child to attend college. But if something happened to you and the trustee is there to figure that out, what if your child is wildly successful as a chef and wants to go to culinary school? Does that qualify as a college? What if they're a terrific inventor like a Bill Gates and they, really want to pursue an invention that they're doing? I mean, you really don't want to, give them sort of golden handcuffs.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is you need to make sure you think it through thoroughly, because if you're trying to use a trust for managing money from the grave, then if you don't think it through thoroughly, it's always going to be the one thing you didn't think of that's going to be the gotcha. And that's good advice. Well, yeah, unfortunately, Catherine, we need to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, it was a pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back here on the Income Generation. We'll be right back. If you're not using someone who's well trained in fixed income and you're born before 1966, it may just be time for you to break up with that advisor and move on. I would suggest someone who will care for you through these important years of your life. If you need help finding someone, call or write us. I'd also like to remind you of the special report entitled The Income Generation. This is available free to you, our loyal viewers, online. If you haven't downloaded your report, pick it up after the show. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. We all want to live to a ripe old age, and increasingly, more and more of us are doing so. The average life expectancy today in the United States is 78.7 years, compared to 68.2 years in 1950. But by some estimates, that rate will increase past age 80 by the year 2050. And generally speaking, this is pretty good news. But the fact that old age is also often accompanied by declining health and the need for increasingly expensive health care creates a host of challenges for society as a whole and for many individual families. It was only a few years ago that my own dear mom passed away, and I was grateful for all the years that I had with her. Today, many of my friends in their mid to late 50s, and probably yours too, have parents who are still alive. And in many cases, those friends might be helping their parents financially. In fact, according to a recent Care.com survey, nearly 1 in 4 Americans help support a parent financially. While that's admirable, it can also be unfortunate when it creates a financial hardship for the child. One of the most common reasons for hardship occurs in that families don't discuss the issue until after the hardship becomes obvious or absolutely unfixable. As with any issue involving your money, the key to avoiding problems lies in planning, Without a well thought out plan in place, you could very well end up facing multiple problems all at the same time. Having to cover large unexpected medical bills, having to settle for subpar care for your parents, or of course depleting your own retirement savings. And all of that is in addition to the arguments, the worry, and the emotional stress of the entire situation. So instead of waiting until you're in this situation, take action now, starting with the following simple steps. First, have a frank conversation with your spouse while your parents are still wholly or mostly independent about the possibility of having to help them financially should they need it. You and your spouse are in this together after all, and it's important to make sure that you're both be on the same page if and when this issue arises. Make sure that you discuss helping out both sets of parents if that's applicable. Next, have an equally frank conversation with your parents about their financial situation, their health, and their goals, as well as their expectations for the coming years. Now, that one should seem obvious, I know, but let's face it, many people avoid having this conversation. Why? Because it can be uncomfortable. Children might be afraid of learning their parents' finances aren't as stable as they thought. And the parents might be afraid of letting their kids find out and realizing that they might become a financial burden, which clearly no parent ever wants. Nevertheless, it's better to face those fears early and to identify potential challenges ahead of time, while there's still plenty of time to address them and to fix the situation. With that in mind, my final tip is the same one I shared about having a financial discussion with your own grown children, and that is to consider bringing in a professional into your mix, someone who's qualified, a qualified financial planner specializing in retirement planning. That person, if they're good at what they do, can improve your odds of avoiding the financial problems associated with supporting an aging parent in many different ways. First, they can help ensure your calculations and projections are accurate and realistic too. With a professional's knowledge of the financial markets and the economic factors that impact retirement, they'll help you determine your parents' needs and also to what extent you might be able or may not be able to help them without jeopardizing your own retirement goals. Second, they can help identify potential options and alternatives for helping your parents that you might not know about, things such as special programs and tax saving strategies. And finally, as in that meeting with your own grown children, is really where a professional advisor can help bring a kind of a clarifying element of objectivity to the entire process and lessen any discomfort or distracting emotional elements that inevitably are going to be there. That's just one more reason why it's worth the time and effort to find the right financial advisor. And I provide a number of tips on how to do just that in my book, Return on Principle, which is available, as many of you know, on Amazon. Now, I'd like to bring on my good friend and fellow author, Dee Carter. Dee Carter is the founder of Carter Financial Group in Midland, Texas. He also is a repeat guest on The Income Generation. You might recognize him, and one of my absolute closest friends. He's a past winner of the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors Lifetime Achievement Award and the host of his own popular weekly radio show. His new book is called It's Now or Never: How to Enjoy Your Life and Not Let Your Investments Own You. Dee, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's good to be back.
You know, of course, we're talking about this income generation, this sandwich generation that a lot of people find themselves in, taking care of older parents, taking care of adult children who may not be quite self-sufficient yet. You know, tell us about maybe some things that are in your book that might help these members of the sandwich generation that are in the middle in terms of giving them some good advice that could help them get through this difficult period in their lives.
You know, one of the best things they can do is to consult somebody that has been there. One of the reasons I wrote the book was to give some of the illustrations that I had children in college. I had older parents. I had a mother who was in a nursing home. So I'm taking care of one generation and I'm taking care of the other one on the other side of me. And the only way I could have done it is to make sure that I had the funds necessary to do so. Had I not consulted someone to help me, even us advisors, we need someone occasionally to kind of tell us what we're doing right or wrong. And I even went to somebody else to check, make sure I was doing the right things. But the real best advice I've given is to find someone that you can depend on, someone that you can really trust, and someone that you feel a very good camaraderie with, and sit down and tell them your whole story, give them the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, and literally let them guide you. Because the only way you're going to get there is to have someone really take a good close look at where you are.
So, since we only have about a minute and a half left, tell us about your book. Tell us about how you teach people not to be a victim of their money, how to control their money and use it for good versus being reactive.
Well, one of the things I do is try to point out the difference between growth and income, Dave, as you so well pointed out in your books. But what we try to do is to teach them that there's a difference between growth and income, and get them to understand that with income situation, you can certainly take care of yourself quite capably and make a really good return on your money and not have to worry about the ups and downs of the stock market. One thing I try to do is take them as much as I possibly can away from the risk area as much as we can. There's some areas that we would like for them to stay in, obviously, but we try to take them as close as we can to the edge of where they're getting that low amount of risk and the best return possible, so they can go to bed at night and sleep. And also, guess what? They can get up and enjoy their lives the next day and not have to worry about it.
So I guess you're right. I guess it's if you're in the stock market, your money controls you, because if you're counting on taking withdrawals for your income, your cash flow, and the market drops, well, now your whole lifestyle changes, or you're forced to spend principal or go back to work. Your money controls you. But if you got that check coming in every month, then you're in control. So your final 15 minutes of words of wisdom for those members of the income generation over the age of 50, or I should say 15 seconds of words of wisdom.
The best I give is this: make sure you have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you'll never know when you get there. Sit down with someone and get yourself a plan, something to go by, a blueprint to know when you're going to get there, how you're going to get there, and what you're going to do when you get there, and how much you're going to enjoy it, because that's really all it's about.
Yep. Now you know why Dee is one of my best friends in the whole world. We're kindred spirits. Dee, thanks again for being back on the show. And you stay with us. We'll be right back here on The Income Generation. If you're not using someone who's well-trained in fixed income and you're born before 1966, it may just be time for you to break up with that advisor and move on. I would suggest someone who will care for you through these important years of your life. If you need help finding someone, call or write us. I'd also like to remind you of the special report entitled The Income Generation. This is available free to you, our loyal viewers, online. If you haven't downloaded your report, pick it up after the show. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. Just to recap, it is important to remember that we start this pre-retirement stage when you're still in the accumulation stage of your life. And we might even be willing to take a bit of risk with our investments in the pursuit of more growth. We don't necessarily at that stage need the income yet, after all. And if the market tanks and we suffer a loss, we know we still have time on our side to recoup from that loss. And that is all very reasonable. But one of the greatest dangers of the sandwich generation is that it can cause you to stay stuck in this accumulation stage and in this mindset for a lot longer than you should. One reason is that the financial demands of helping aging parents and grown children are compelling many baby boomers to delay retirement. Last year, 32% of Americans aged 65 to 69 were still employed, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That number is expected to jump to 36% within the next 6 years. And while, yes, it's true that many people are still working not just for financial reasons, but because they enjoy their work, the danger is still this. Remaining active or even planning to remain active in the workforce increases the odds that you may just neglect to make the necessary shift from the growth phase of financial planning to the income phase, from the accumulation phase to that phase of income and protection. Psychologically, yes, it's understandable. If you're still working and supporting children and your parents are still in the picture, it probably feels like you're still in the same stage of life you were 20 years ago. And it's easier to forget or neglect that fact as you're getting older also. But by shortchanging or by neglecting your own financial security in retirement, you're increasing the odds that your own children are going to end up getting caught in the sandwich generation themselves, in that squeeze in the middle, increasing the odds that you'll eventually become a financial burden to them. And again, I know that's something that all of us agree that none of us wants. Now, I'd like to welcome Marguerita Cheng to discuss her article that took Kiplinger's by storm about the sandwich generation. Marguerita Cheng is CEO of Blue Ocean Global Wealth and a frequent contributor to many top financial publications. She often speaks to groups and organizations on a variety of important financial topics, including Social Security, elder care, and, yes, of course, retirement. She recently published an article for Kiplinger called Advice to the Sandwich Generation. Marguerita, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. So this is obviously an important topic for you within the financial planning world. And I find that a lot of times people have real life stories that make this concern about the sandwich generation really something that's important to them personally. Are you in that group where you've had personal experiences that motivated you to make this kind of sort of an area of expertise within your own business?
Absolutely. So this is a very important topic to me, both personally and professionally, because I found myself sandwiched. At the time, I was caring for my youngest child, who was 8, and my dad, who was 80, who had Parkinson's disease. So this is a topic that really hits home for me. And I take every opportunity to talk about it, not because I think I'm so great, but I think it's a topic that affects many people.
And it does, yeah. It really, really does. So, what was the toughest, what did you find was the toughest part in your case? Normally we talk about sandwich generation, we're talking about an adult child who hasn't flown the nest yet. In your case, it wasn't just, gee, I feel emotionally obligated to take care of an adult child that's graduated from school. It was an 8-year-old child. You really had to do that. So, what was the toughest part of this for you? Was it the emotional side? Was it the financial side? Talk to us about this, because it's not all about the money, right?
Correct. It's not all about the money. So at that time, my youngest child was 8, my middle child was 15, and my eldest child was 17. So I have 2 kids in high school.
So the story gets deeper. 3 children, okay.
It does. And then my dad's health started to decline. I think the most stressful part really wasn't my kids. It was observing the decline in my dad's health. I am very proactive. I am a certified financial planner. And early on, I did encourage my parents to plan. We started talking about this when my mom was 53 and my dad was 68.
Now let me ask you, Marguerita, though, were you a caregiver also, helping your dad personally in addition to financially?
So my parents were fine financially because we did planning. I did provide caregiver supports. My parents had long-term care insurance, so cost really wasn't so much an issue. And for that, I'm grateful.
Sure.
But it's still very emotionally and mentally exhausting for caregivers and being sandwiched. Of course, there's the financial impact, but what makes it so stressful is you are observing a loved one experience a decline in health.
Yeah, at a time when you got teenage children, you need to spend quality time with and make sure they grow up right, but you also want to spend the time with your dad. So we need to leave it there for this segment. We'll be right back to talk with you more, and you stay with us. We'll be back on The Income Generation. On a previous episode of The Income Generation, we shared a step-by-step strategy for answering the question, how much money do I need to retire? You need to determine the exact dollar amount you'll need for your own retirement goals, regardless of the level of support you provide your parents and children. If you don't get comfortable with that number and what it is, then your family will continue to expect things from you possibly that maybe you can't quite oblige. You could be jeopardizing your own entire retirement. And now it's time to welcome back Marguerita Cheng. So, Marguerita, talking about this issue with your dad and your teenage children, your 8-year-old, what are one or two things that you can share with our income generation members that maybe you learned or that you wish that you had done better so that they can learn from everything that you've been through?
Sure. So I would say encourage caregivers to find time to care for themselves. It is okay to be a little bit selfish because you are also being very selfless. I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth. What I mean by this is sometimes if your dad or loved one, I'm saying my dad because it was me, has been in the hospital and you don't have time to cook, it's okay to get carry out. Or if people ask how they can help, it's okay for you to accept help. It is not a sign of weakness. We have all been in that situation. So that's what I would say. I think that's very helpful. The second tip, don't do anything drastic. Don't quit your job. See if you can work from home. Talk to your boss. But the most important thing is for you not to do anything drastic with your finances.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very good advice. It's like anything else. Now, as a CFP, in the 45 seconds or so we have left in the segment as a CFP, are there any asset allocation changes you think people might want to make as they get, as they get these extra liabilities thrown on them? And I know you can't give specific recommendations because we're talking to a whole television audience, but what would you say to that?
So sure. I mean, I would say if you think your parents are or a loved one is going to need help, my recommendations is to have some extra cash reserves. Normally we say 6 to 12 months. Hey, it's okay if you have closer to 18 months or even 24 months. Just to be prepared for airplane tickets or needing to provide support for loved ones.
Sure. So have a little more cash on hand. And if you think you might have to dip into things beyond your cash, then you might even need to consider lowering your risk a little bit at that time to make sure that you don't get stuck taking withdrawals in a downdraft. So, Marguerita, it's been very helpful today. I really glad that you made the time to spend with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you stay with us too. I'm grateful for each and every one of you, our loyal Income Generation viewers. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more here on the Income Generation. I'd like to thank all three of our guests for joining us today for another episode of The Income Generation. And I also want to thank you, our new and returning viewers. For most of us, nothing is more important or meaningful than our family. If we're lucky, we have good parents that we love and good children and possibly grandchildren. But in the modern age, the affection we have for our families can be complicated by some hard fiscal realities. Longer lifespans, rising healthcare costs, economic uncertainty, and a tight job market are all some of those factors. Put them all together in a big blender and push the button, and you have two generations facing a host of financial challenges, and another generation stuck in the middle. The good news, though, is that our generation, the income generation, has the opportunity to help break a vicious cycle that's been building and growing now for over 30 years. You don't have to pass this generational squeeze down to your children. You don't have to sandwich them between addressing the financial needs of their children and, yes, of your needs too. You can break the cycle by focusing first and foremost on your own needs and goals right now, and by making sure that you have a financial strategy that provides the protection and income necessary to achieve those goals. You can pair that focus with open communication and frank conversations, as we heard from all of our guests, with your loved ones, parents and children, creating boundaries and realistic expectations that work toward everyone's best interest long term. And you can recognize the importance and value of estate planning as a means of protecting your entire family from one generation to the next, which, yes, can help you avoid a lot of unnecessary stress and emotional anguish. So, if you're feeling the sandwich generation squeeze yourself, try to step back for a moment and try to see the big picture. If you're a member of the income generation over the age of 50 and haven't yet thought about making the strategic shift from growth to protection and income, recognize that it's probably time. Recognize that, like everyone else, you too are getting older. Thanks for watching. If you're close to retirement and you really want to know how to protect and maximize your money, it's absolutely essential to stay informed and up to date. And yes, right here is where you can do it every single week on the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and thanks again. We'll see you next week. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching the Income Generation.